The alien outpost on Vorak Station was alive with noise and colors. Merchants shouted in strange languages, alien guards patrolled with glowing weapons, and the smell of metal, fuel, and alien spices filled the air. Humans were rare here, and when they appeared, they were often treated as curiosities or worse, as easy targets. Ethan Cross walked calmly through the busy market. He was here for work, to deliver repaired equipment to the station's military wing. But he knew eyes were following him. It wasn't just because he was human. It was because today, he had been called to meet someone unusual. At the far end of the courtyard stood Renara, a tiny alien warrior with crimson eyes and short dark hair that glinted under the station's lights. Her armor was scratched from countless battles, and a curved blade rested on her hip. She was only up to Ethan's chest in height, but the way she stood made her seem twice as big. Her people, the Krylons, were known for their combat skill and fierce pride. When Ethan approached, Renara smirked. "So this is the human they sent me," she said loudly, making sure the other warriors nearby could hear. "I expected more." "Size," she added, her eyes scanning him from head to toe. A few of the Krylons laughed, and someone muttered in their language, clearly mocking him. Ethan didn't flinch. "Size isn't everything," he replied calmly. Adjusting the strap of his tool bag, Renara raised an eyebrow. Clearly amused. "We'll see about that," she said, stepping closer. Her voice was low now, only for him to hear. "I've heard humans break easily, like glass. I hope you won't slow me down." Before Ethan could respond, a loud alarm echoed through the courtyard. The station's AI voice boomed in multiple languages. Warning of a security breach. Everyone froze for half a second before armored mercenaries burst through the market gates. They fired stun bolts into the air, scattering civilians. Renara's eyes lit up not with fear, but with the thrill of battle. She drew her blade in one swift motion and looked at Ethan. "Stay behind me, human," she ordered, clearly assuming he couldn't handle himself. But Ethan didn't stay behind her. When a mercenary lunged toward them, Ethan sidestepped, grabbed the attacker's arm, and twisted it so fast the man dropped his weapon. Renara blinked in surprise before cutting down another attacker. For the next few minutes, they fought back to back, moving without words, covering each other's blind spots. Ethan used speed and precision rather than brute force, while Renara's strikes were fierce and unrelenting. When the last mercenary ran off, the courtyard slowly returned to normal. The other warriors stared at Ethan, no longer laughing. Renara sheathed her blade and walked up to him. "You fight better than I expected," she admitted reluctantly. "But you're still small," she added with a grin, clearly unwilling to drop the joke just yet. Ethan just smiled. "You'll see," he said simply. Renara tilted her head, sensing the quiet confidence in his tone. Something about it bothered her, because deep down, she wasn't sure she was still right about him. Her commander appeared, barking orders. The mercenary attack had damaged several energy storage units, and a dangerous mission was forming. Renara was told to escort a shipment of rare energy crystals across the alien desert to another base. When she heard that Ethan was assigned as her partner for the job, she almost protested, but the commander's word was law, and she could only glare at the human. "This will be interesting," she muttered under her breath. As they walked toward the hangar, Renara kept glancing at him. She was still thinking about how easily he had disarmed that mercenary. Humans weren't supposed to be that fast, not compared to Krylons, and yet, there was something about the way he moved, efficient, controlled, that told her he wasn't just lucky. Ethan, on the other hand, didn't seem to notice her staring. He checked the gear in his bag, making sure everything was ready for the journey. He'd been on dangerous runs before, but something told him this mission would be different, not because of the desert or the raiders they might face, but because of the small warrior walking beside him. She was unpredictable, sharp-tongued, and obviously skilled, and she had already decided to test him. By the time they reached the hangar, the sun of the alien world was dipping low. casting red light across the sand. The air shimmered with heat, and the sound of the wind carried the scent of dust and metal. 2 armored speed bikes waited for them, engines humming softly. Rinara climbed onto hers with the grace of a predator. Glancing back at Ethan, "Try to keep up, human," she said with a smirk. Ethan climbed onto his bike. Meeting her gaze without a word, the engines roared and they sped out into the desert, the heat waves swallowing them. Neither of them knew it yet, but before the journey was over, Rinara would stop mocking his size. She would learn that sometimes the smallest things in the galaxy carried the greatest strength. And one night, that truth would change everything between them. Asterisk. The desert stretched endlessly before them, glowing orange under the dying light of the alien sun. The heat was intense, but the wind from their speeding bikes gave some relief. Ethan kept his eyes on the horizon, scanning for movement. Rinara was just ahead, riding as if the sand itself obeyed her, each turn smooth and calculated. Every now and then, she glanced back, not out of concern, but to make sure he wasn't falling behind. They had been ordered to deliver the rare energy crystals to a secure base 300 kilometers away. The crystals were fragile and unstable, and if damaged, could cause an explosion big enough to level the outpost. Rinara carried them in a reinforced case strapped to her back. She didn't trust Ethan with them, not yet. As the sun dipped lower, the shadows of the desert grew long. Rinara slowed her bike, pulling alongside Ethan. "Still alive back there?" she called over the wind, her voice full of playful mockery. Ethan didn't take the bait. "Just making sure you don't get lost," he replied, his tone calm. Her eyes narrowed, but the corner of her mouth twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. They stopped at a rocky ridge to rest for the night. The heat of the day was fading fast, and the desert was growing cold. Rinara dismounted first, checking the case of crystals carefully. Ethan unpacked a small heat generator from his bag and set it between them. He began cooking a simple meal from ration packs, the smell of warm food filling the air. Rinara watched him with curiosity. Humans, in her experience, were loud and impatient, but this one was quiet, methodical, and seemed comfortable in the silence. "You don't talk much," she said finally. "I only talk when there's something worth saying," he replied. Handing her a portion of the food, she accepted it, though she kept her guard up. They ate in silence, the desert wind whistling softly around them. The stars above began to appear, countless points of light scattered across the black sky. It was beautiful, but also dangerous night was when the predators of the desert came. Out, they didn't have to wait long. A low growl echoed through the rocks. Ethan froze, setting his food aside. Rinara's hand went to her blade, her eyes scanning the darkness. From the shadows, 2 massive shapes emerged, desert prowlers. Creatures with armored hides and glowing yellow eyes. Their movements were slow and deliberate, their attention fixed on the 2 travelers. Rinara stood, stepping forward with her weapon drawn. "Stay behind me, human," she said again, but Ethan ignored her, already pulling a small device from his bag. Before she could protest, he pressed a button, and a high-pitched pulse filled the air. The creatures hissed, shaking their heads violently before retreating back into the shadows. Rinara blinked in surprise. "What was that?" she demanded. "Ultrasonic deterrent," Ethan said, sitting back down. "They don't like the sound." She stared at him for a long moment before slowly lowering her weapon. "You could have told me you had that," she muttered. "You could have told me to lead the way," he replied, a faint smirk on his face. They settled in for the night, taking turns keeping watch. When Rinara's shift ended, she hesitated before lying down. The desert's night air was freezing. Now, and even with her armor, the cold crept in. She glanced at Ethan, who sat quietly near the small heat generator, his eyes scanning the darkness. He looked completely at ease, as if this kind of danger was normal for him, for reasons she didn't fully understand, that made her feel safe. Before dawn, they set out again. The wind was harsher now, and a sandstorm was building in the distance. Renara pulled her visor down, signaling for Ethan to follow close. Visibility dropped fast as the storm swallowed them. The sand pelted their armor and skin like tiny blades. Ethan leaned forward, keeping his bike steady despite the low visibility. Through the thick dust, he caught glimpses of Renara's silhouette ahead. If he lost sight of her, the desert could swallow him whole. Hours later, they finally broke free of the storm, both covered in fine red dust. Renara stopped her bike and pulled off her helmet, shaking the sand from her hair. She looked at Ethan with a new kind of respect. "You didn't fall behind," she said, almost sounding surprised. "I told you," he replied simply. "I can keep up." Her lips curled into a smirk. "Maybe you're not completely useless after all," she said, turning back toward the road. But deep inside, she was starting to wonder if she had underestimated him far more than she realized. They rode on as the day grew hot again. Neither of them knew that in less than 24 hours, a trap would change everything. And when it did, they would have no choice but to trust each other completely. By the third day, the desert had shifted from rolling dunes to jagged cliffs of red stone. The road ahead twisted into a deep canyon, its walls towering high on both sides. Renara slowed her bike and glanced over her shoulder at Ethan. "This is raider territory," she warned. "Stay sharp." Ethan simply nodded, checking his surroundings without a word. The canyon was silent except for the echo of their engines. It was the kind of silence that felt wrong, too still, too empty, as if the entire desert was holding its breath. Halfway through, the trap was sprung. A loud metallic bang echoed from above, and before they could react, a steel net dropped from the cliffs. It hit the ground ahead of them, crackling with electric charge. At the same moment, the path behind them was sealed by a collapsing rockslide. Dust and pebbles rained down as Renara skidded her bike to a stop. Ethan right beside her. Figures appeared on the canyon walls. Raiders in patchwork armor, their faces hidden behind breathing masks. Energy rifles aimed down at them, ready to fire. The leader, a tall alien with glowing green eyes, called out, "Drop the case and walk away, or you both die here." Renara's grip tightened on the crystal case. "Not an option," she said, her voice cold. Ethan's eyes scanned the canyon walls, noting every ledge, every angle, every possible escape route. The raiders began to close in from both sides, their boots crunching on the gravel. Renara leaned toward Ethan and muttered, "Cover me, I'll take the left." But Ethan shook his head slightly. "No, we'll take the center, follow my lead." Before she could argue, he yanked a smoke charge from his belt and hurled it at the ground. The canyon filled with thick gray haze, blinding the raiders. Ethan moved fast, weaving through the smoke, using the canyon walls for cover. Renara stayed close, swinging her blade at any shadow that got too close. A raider lunged out of the smoke toward Ethan, with a quick step aside. Ethan grabbed the attacker's weapon arm and twisted, sending the rifle clattering to the ground. He knocked the raider into another, clearing a small path forward. Renara covered his back, her blade slicing through a raider's armor with precision. They fought their way toward a narrow side passage Ethan had spotted earlier. It was barely wide enough for two people, but it offered a chance to escape the kill zone. As they reached it, a blast from an energy rifle struck the wall just above Renara's head, showering them with stone fragments. She stumbled, but Ethan caught her before she fell. "Go," he urged, pushing her into the passage first. The narrow path twisted and climbed, forcing them to abandon their bikes. The sound of raiders shouting echoed behind them, but the tight space made it hard for their pursuers to fire without hitting each other. Ethan led the way, his boots kicking up dust. Renara kept glancing back, ready to fight if needed. After what felt like an endless climb, they emerged into a small open area halfway up the canyon wall. From here, they could see the desert stretching far in the distance, but their relief didn't last long. Rinara's eyes widened as she saw a second group of raiders moving in from another ledge, cutting off their escape. "Looks like we're surrounded," she said grimly. Ethan didn't respond immediately, his mind racing. The only way out was down a drop of at least 20 meters into a rocky slope. It was dangerous, but it was better than being captured. "Can you jump?" Ethan asked. Rinara scoffed. "Of course I can, but I'm not leaving the crystals behind." Ethan gave a small nod. "Then we jumped together." The raiders were closing in now, their weapons raised. Rinara glanced at Ethan, her eyes narrowing. "If we die, human." "I'm blaming you," she said. He smirked. "If we die, you can tell me all about it on the way down." Without another word, they leapt. The wind roared in their ears as they dropped toward the slope. Ethan hit the ground and rolled, taking most of the impact. Rinara landed beside him, sliding down the slope in a spray of dust and gravel. Both came to a stop at the base, bruised but alive. The canyon behind them was now filled with angry shouts, but the raiders couldn't follow. Without climbing down, Ethan pulled Rinara to her feet. "We need to keep moving before they find another way around," he said. She gave a short nod, still catching her breath. As they hurried toward the open desert, Rinara glanced at him from the corner of her eye. "You could have run when they went for me," she said quietly. Ethan looked at her, his tone steady. "I don't leave people behind." For a moment, she didn't reply, but something in her expression softened. The sun was already low again, painting the horizon in deep shades of red. They still had far to go, and now they were on foot. The desert was full of dangers, and the raiders would not give up so easily. But something had changed. Rinara no longer looked at Ethan as just a human mechanic. He had risked himself for her without hesitation, and for the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, he was more than she had imagined. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The real test had yet to come. The desert night was colder than Rinara remembered. Every breath turned to mist in the thin air. Her armor kept some of the chill away, but it wasn't enough. Beside her, Ethan walked steadily, his eyes scanning the horizon. The sound of their footsteps on the sand was the only thing breaking the silence. They had been walking for hours after escaping the raiders. The stars above were sharp and endless. The moonlight painted the dunes in silver, making the desert look almost peaceful. Rinara glanced at Ethan from the corner of her eye. He was carrying the crystal case now, having insisted when he noticed she was limping. She had twisted her ankle during their jump, but she hadn't said anything. She was surprised he had noticed at all. Even more surprised when he took the load without a word. Finally, they stopped near a cluster of rocks to rest. Ethan set the case down and unpacked a thermal blanket from his bag. He draped it over her shoulders without asking. Rinara stiffened. Unused to such gestures. "You don't have to," she muttered. "I know," he replied simply. Sitting down opposite her for a while, neither of them spoke. The crackle of the small heat generator was the only sound between them. Then Rinara broke the silence, her voice quieter than usual. "You want to know why I keep teasing you, human?" Ethan looked up from adjusting the generator. "I figured it was because you didn't like me." She shook her head slowly. "In my culture, warriors mock each other to show respect. It's how we test strength. Words first, then battle." Ethan tilted his head, a faint smile on his lips. "So, all this time you were showing me respect?" Her eyes narrowed. "Don't twist it. I still thought you were too small to survive out here." He chuckled softly. "And now?" Her gaze lingered on him for a moment before she looked away. "Now? I'm not sure," she admitted. The wind whistled through the rocks, carrying the scent of dry sand and something faintly metallic. Ethan reached into his pack and pulled out a ration bar, breaking it in half and offering her a piece. She hesitated, then took it. They ate in silence. For a moment, their eyes meeting briefly before darting away again. "You fight differently," Rinara said after a while. "Not like a Krylin, not like a mercenary. I don't like wasting energy, Ethan replied. Every move has to count in my line of work. You don't get second chances. Her head tilted slightly. And what line of work is that? Mechanic, he said simply. Her brows rose. You fight like a soldier, but you're a mechanic? Sometimes fixing things means fighting to keep them from being destroyed, he said, his voice calm. For the first time, Rhaenyra laughed, just a small, short laugh, but genuine. It startled Ethan enough that he looked at her with raised eyebrows. What? He asked. You're strange, human, she said, still smiling faintly. You don't brag, you don't posture, but you win fights. It's unexpected. Before he could answer, a faint sound reached their ears, a scraping, dragging noise. Both of them froze. Ethan quietly picked up his weapon, Rhaenyra drawing her blade. From the shadows between the rocks, a long, spiny creature emerged, its many legs clicking against the stone. Its eyes glowed faintly green, and its mouth opened to reveal rows of thin, needle-like teeth. Desert crawler, Rhaenyra whispered. Fast, poisonous, and hungry. The creature hissed, its body tensing to strike. Ethan stepped slightly in front of her without thinking. On my mark, he murmured. When the crawler lunged, Ethan fired a short burst from his pistol, hitting its front legs. It shrieked and twisted, giving Rhaenyra an opening to drive her blade deep into its side. The crawler writhed once, then fell still. Ethan turned to check her. You okay? She nodded, breathing hard. You didn't have to step in front of me, she said. I didn't think about it, he replied. Her gaze softened in moonlight. That's the problem, she murmured, almost to herself. They dragged the crawler's body away from their camp to avoid attracting more predators. When they returned to the heat of the generator, Rhaenyra sat closer to Ethan without saying anything. After a long pause, she spoke again. I fought beside many warriors, human, but none like you. Ethan looked at her, his voice steady. And is that good or bad? She met his gaze, her crimson eyes reflecting the firelight. It's dangerous, she said softly, because I don't know if I'm testing your strength anymore, or if I'm starting to trust you. The words hung between them, heavy but unspoken. For the rest of the night, they kept watch together in silence. But something had shifted. The teasing was gone, replaced by something deeper, something neither of them wanted to name just yet. And as dawn broke, casting golden light over the endless dunes, both knew one thing. The journey ahead was far from over, and the closer they got to their destination, the closer they were drawn to each other, whether they wanted it or not. By the time the sun dipped behind the dunes again, they had reached the outer edge of the canyonlands. The desert floor stretched wide and flat now, but the air was colder. Sharper, dark clouds rolled in from the horizon, heavy with a storm unlike anything Ethan had seen in these lands before. Rhaenyra slowed her pace, scanning the sky with a frown. That's not rain, she said, her voice tense. Ethan followed her gaze. The clouds shimmered faintly with static and electrical storm. If it hit them in the open, their gear would fry, and the crystals could overload. We need shelter, Ethan said. She nodded, pointing toward a cluster of jagged rock formations in the distance. They hurried, the wind already picking up, carrying a faint hum of charged energy. By the time they reached the rocks, the storm was nearly on top of them. Flashes of bluish lightning streaked across the sky, but unlike normal lightning, these bolts moved horizontally, crawling through the clouds like living things. The air smelled of ozone, and their skin prickled from the charge. They found a narrow entrance between two slabs of stone, leading into a hollowed-out cavern. Inside, it was dark, the air cool and still. Ethan set the crystal case carefully in the corner, away from any moisture or dust. Rhaenyra lit a small lantern from her pack, its orange glow chasing the shadows away. For the first time in days, they had a space that felt safe. The storm raged outside, the sound of static wind like a chorus of whispers. They sat opposite each other near the lantern, the flickering light casting shadows on the cavern walls. Ethan checked the crystals for any sign of damage, then began adjusting the power cells in his gear. Rhaenyra watched him quietly for a while before speaking. "You never told me why you came here," she said. Ethan didn't look up. "I take jobs where they're needed," he replied. "That's not an answer," she said, leaning forward. Her crimson eyes studied him. "There's something you're not saying." Ethan finally met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "I don't talk about my past," he said. Rhaenyra tilted her head. "Because it hurts?" He gave a small shrug. "Because it doesn't change the present." The lantern light flickered between them. Rhaenyra leaned back against the cavern wall, her voice softer now. "You know, in Krylan culture, sharing a night of truth is rare." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "A night of truth?" She nodded. "It's when two warriors speak without masks, without pride, without pretending to be more or less than they are. Sometimes it's done before a great battle, sometimes before something else." Ethan studied her for a moment. "And what are we before?" Her lips curved into a faint, almost shy smile. "Maybe both." The storm outside grew louder, a sharp crack of lightning making the cavern tremble. Rhaenyra's eyes flickered to the opening before returning to him. "When I first saw you, I thought you'd be another weak human trying to prove himself. But you surprised me." Ethan chuckled. "You've said that before. This time." "I mean it," she replied, her tone serious. "You don't fight for glory or for show. You fight for survival. And for the people beside you. That's rare." Ethan didn't reply right away. Instead, he reached into his pack and pulled out a small, dented metal charm, a circular disc etched with faded symbols. He set it on the ground between them. "This belonged to my crew," he said quietly. "They're gone now, shipwreck on a frozen moon. I was the only one who made it back." Rhaenyra's gaze softened. "That's why you don't talk about the past," she said. Ethan nodded. "And why I don't leave anyone behind." Silence filled the cavern again, but it wasn't the cold, distant silence from before. It was warmer, heavier. Rhaenyra shifted closer to him, her armor plates brushing against his arm. "You've earned my respect, human," she said. Ethan smirked. "Took long enough." She rolled her eyes but smiled. "You're still smaller than me," she teased. But her tone lacked the sharpness it once had. The storm outside howled louder. They shared the heat of the lantern and the small space between them. For a moment, neither spoke, just listening to the sound of static and wind. Then, Rhaenyra's hand found his, her fingers warm despite the chill. Ethan didn't pull away. She looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "If we survive this mission, I'll tell you something I've never told anyone." Ethan met her gaze steadily. "Then I guess we'll have to survive." Lightning lit the cavern entrance again, casting their shadows long and close together on the stone. And for the rest of that night, they stayed side by side, not as reluctant partners, not as rivals, but as two warriors bound by a truth neither could ignore anymore. The storm passed by morning, leaving the desert in eerie silence. The ground still crackled faintly under their boots, as if the air itself hadn't forgotten the lightning. Rhaenyra was the first to step out of the cavern. Scanning the horizon, the sky was a pale yellow, the sun breaking through the last of the clouds. It should have felt like a new beginning, but something in the air told Ethan otherwise. They didn't speak much as they packed their gear. The case of energy crystals was still intact, but the storm had delayed them. If the raiders had tracked their path, they might already be ahead as they started across the open flats. Ethan's instincts kept tugging at him. Every gust of wind seemed to carry the faintest sound of movement. He glanced at Rhaenyra, and from the way her jaw tightened, he knew she felt it too. Hours passed under the unforgiving sun. The land ahead was broken by scattered boulders, perfect for an ambush. Ethan slowed, motioning for Rhaenyra to follow his lead. They weaved between the rocks, every step careful, every breath measured. It happened without warning. A sharp crack echoed, followed by a flash of red light. A plasma bolt slammed into the sand at Ethan's feet. Before he could react, Half a dozen raiders rose from behind the rocks. Weapons aimed, more appeared behind them, cutting off retreat. Renara's hand went to her blade instantly. Ethan raised his pistol, their backs pressing together. The leader of this group was different, taller, with heavy armor and a jagged scar running across his mask. "You've caused us trouble," the leader growled. "Drop the crystals, and maybe we let you live." Renara's voice was like steel. "Come and take them," the fight erupted. Plasma fire scorched the air as Ethan and Renara moved in perfect sync. She charged forward with the speed of a striking animal, her blade deflecting shots and finding weak spots in armor. Ethan covered her flanks, his shots precise, every movement calculated to keep the raiders from surrounding them. A raider lunged at Renara from the side, but Ethan intercepted, slamming his shoulder into the attacker and knocking them to the ground. Another tried to grab the crystal case, but Renara spun low, sweeping their legs before driving her blade into their chest plate. For every raider they dropped, two more seemed to appear. The leader charged at Ethan, swinging a heavy plasma axe. Ethan barely dodged, the weapon striking the ground and leaving a glowing scar in the rock. He fired twice at close range, forcing the leader back, but the tide was turning. One raider's shot grazed Ethan's shoulder, burning through his jacket. He stumbled, and Renara caught him by the arm, pulling him back behind cover. "You're bleeding," she said, her voice tense. "I've had worse," he replied. Reloading with quick, steady hands, the leader barked an order, and the raiders began closing in again. They had no time left. Ethan's eyes darted to the boulders above, unstable from the storm's lightning strikes. If they could bring them down, they might block the raiders' advance. He leaned toward Renara. "On my signal, get to the ridge." "What are you planning?" she demanded. "Just trust me," he said. She didn't argue. The moment he shouted, "Now!" she bolted toward the ridge, drawing the raiders' attention. Ethan fired at the weakest points in the rock above, the sharp cracks of his pistol echoing through the canyon. The boulders shuddered, then crashed down in a roaring avalanche. Dust and debris filled the air, cutting the raiders off and giving them a narrow window to escape. They ran hard, weaving between the last standing rocks until the sounds of pursuit faded. When they finally stopped, both were breathing heavily. Ethan dropped to one knee, pressing a hand to his bleeding shoulder. Renara crouched beside him, her eyes scanning the wound. "You could have told me you were going to get yourself shot," she said sharply. He smirked despite the pain. "And ruin the surprise?" Her glare softened, without another word. She tore a strip from her undershirt and began wrapping his shoulder, her hand surprisingly gentle. When she was done, she sat back, her gaze locking with his. "You keep doing this," she said quietly, "putting yourself between me and danger. One day, it's going to get you killed." Ethan held her gaze. "Then at least it'll be for something worth dying for." For a moment, the world seemed to go still around them. Renara's lips parted as if to say something, but she closed them again. Instead, she stood, offering him her hand. "Come on, human. We still have a job to finish." He took her hand, rising to his feet. The sun was already dipping again, casting long shadows across the desert. They had survived the storm and the ambush, but both knew the final stretch of their journey would be the most dangerous yet. And somewhere deep inside, Renara realized she wasn't just fighting to deliver the crystals anymore. She was fighting to keep him alive. Asterisk. The last leg of their journey took them through the edge of the Black Dunes, a place where the sand was darker than night and seemed to swallow sound. No wind, no life, just silence and shifting shadows under a pale moon. Ethan and Renara moved carefully, their footsteps sinking into the soft ground. The case of energy crystals felt heavier now, not because of its weight, but because it was the final thing standing between them and the end of this mission. Every step forward meant they were closer to safety and closer to whatever came after. By the time they saw the faint lights of the base on the horizon, exhaustion was pulling at both of them. The towers of the Krylin outpost shimmered faintly in the distance, like a mirage. For a moment, Neither spoke, just stared at it. They had made it. But the unspoken truth between them was that this might also be the moment they went their separate ways. They reached the gates as the first light of dawn spilled across the horizon. The guards recognized Rinara instantly, saluting her. Commander came forward, relief plain on his face when he saw the crystals. "You've done well," he said. His gaze shifted to Ethan, his tone less warm. "And you, human. You did your part." Ethan only nodded, handing the case over, with the mission officially complete. There was no reason for him to stay. The commander dismissed them. Already turning his attention to securing the crystals, Rinara followed Ethan as he walked away from the gates. "You're leaving," she said. Not as a question but as a statement. "That was the deal," he replied. She frowned. Something sharp and unsettled in her chest. "That's it? You just walk away?" Ethan looked at her. "We made it, Rin. That's all that matters." But to her, it wasn't all that mattered, not anymore. Before he could take another step, she caught his wrist. "Come with me," she said. When he hesitated, she added, "It's not an order, it's something else." She led him through the base to a small, quiet chamber lit by soft blue light. The walls were decorated with weapons and banner symbols of Krylin honor. In the center was a low table with 2 cups of dark, steaming liquid. "This," she said, gesturing to the room, "is where Krylin warriors share a private vow." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "A vow?" She nodded, stepping closer. "It's not about battle. It's about choosing someone to stand beside, no matter the fight, no matter the danger. It's a choice we only make once." For a long moment, he didn't speak. The air between them was thick, the silence pressing on both of them. Finally, he said quietly, "Why me?" Rinara's crimson eyes softened. "When we first met, I thought you were weak. I mocked you because I didn't believe in you. But out there, in the desert, you proved me wrong. You never left me, not once, even when you could have. And when you stood in front of me during the crawler attack, I knew I'd found someone worth trusting with my life." She took a step closer until she was only a breath away from him. "In my people's eyes, you're still just a human, but to me, you're my warrior." Ethan's chest tightened at her words. He had been alone for so long that he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to belong somewhere, or to someone. And now, here was this tiny alien warrior, fierce and stubborn, offering him something more than just gratitude. He took one of the cups from the table, the warm liquid steady in his hands. "What happens if I drink this?" he asked, her lips curved into a small smile. "Then you're mine, and I'm yours." For a moment, they just stood there, the weight of the choice hanging between them. Then Ethan drank. The taste was sharp, smoky, and unlike anything he had ever had before. Rinara drank from her own cup, her eyes never leaving his. When she set it down, she stepped forward and pressed her forehead to his. It was a Krylin gesture, a silent promise. Ethan didn't need to understand the words behind it. He understood the meaning. That night, they didn't sleep in separate quarters. They stayed together, talking quietly, sharing stories they had never told anyone else. There was no teasing from her anymore, no sharp jokes about his size, only quiet laughter, the brush of her hand against his, and a sense of peace neither had felt in years. By the time dawn came again, Ethan knew his life had changed. He had come here for a job, expecting to leave with nothing but payment. Instead, he had found something far rarer, a bond forged in fire, danger, and trust. When they stepped out into the morning light, the base was already alive with movement. Rinara glanced at him, a smirk playing at her lips. "Still think I was wrong about you, human?" He smiled. "I think you finally got it right." And as they walked side by side, both knew this was only the beginning of their story. Whatever battles came next, they would face them together.